direction, we'll start drafting up. I've heard some things already. You want to talk, you've been saying this for a month, but you want to talk to about things that first year. We can do that by policy with council, certain things. We'll be throwing those out there. And that first January meeting is usually a Wednesday one anyway. And all things we're discussing, the legal official coming on board and all those things. So, here again, we're going to look for some guidance on this. And we did have a box that we actually had on there, I will say, that we won clear direction. This is it is by, state statute says that it's the mayor's agenda, but we're not starting mayor form of government, so it's the council's agenda, to be clear. And with that said, you give us the guidance. We know what's going on, you finalize the agenda. When I get those final agreements, or they hear nothing back from you, we'll post. Okay. So I guess you're happy with where we're going. Okay?
Until we're not.
We're not, we need change. Got it.
All right, we will move on to item 3.1, Transportation Master Plan Update. Blake.
Okay. So, this is the first time you're hearing the new Transportation Master Plan Update presentation. We presented it to the Planning Commission a little bit ago. So, I put a schedule together to kind of show where we're at, where we're going. Presented to the Planning Commission on the 21st, just before Thanksgiving. We're here now, bold letters, presentation to the City Council. This is just the preliminary findings, the model, everything that's working in it. Then they're going to take this information, put it in the report, prepare a impact fee facilities plan, and impact fee analysis, and we're going to bring it back to the Planning Commission. But we're going to have an open house on January 14th. This open house, we're combining it with the general plan open house, and we're looking at the other master plan updates that we're working on, so storm drain, water, parks, and have them all there so the public can come in and listen to the whole plan as a cohesive. So then on the 6th of February, we're looking at going to the Planning Commission so they can hear it, give a recommendation to the council. 26th, coming with the public hearing and the presentation of the final report. And then on the 11th of March, we're shooting for adoption. That's assuming everything works great. We don't have any really big comments and big issues. I want to give a couple prefaces before we turn the time over to our consultants. We have a development, Olympia Hills, that's planned to come in at some point. We have to use our model with what's currently planned out there. So when that gets approved and we keep moving forward and get this adopted, then we're going to have to come back and revise it with whatever happens on that side. So keep that in mind as we go through this. This is assuming the low density, everything out there. And we have to do this to get our impact fees set so that we can get those adopted and move forward. And then we'll come back and redo it and redo the impact fees based on that. So keep that in mind. So for introductions, we've got Bowen Collins and Parametrics here. We've contracted with both of them as a combined team to come in and do this project for us. And Kai is here from Parametrics. He'll give the meat of this presentation. And feel free to jump in as we go and we can answer questions. I don't know if anyone heard the presentation to the Planning Commission. There were some changes made based on some of their comments. So this is a little bit newer from that. And turn the time over to Kai.
Great, thanks, Blake. So the first thing we'll run through is just some existing conditions. Here we have our population estimates dating back the last 20 or 10 or so years. I don't probably need to tell you that you guys are growing really fast. 105% population growth from 2010 and 2018. That translates into a need for transportation improvements. Here's what the current land use looks like, translated into our traffic analysis zones. So on the left we've got households and on the right employment. We look at, as part of our existing conditions analysis, comparative travel statistics. So we pull in some data from the U.S. Census American Community Survey to give us just a general idea of some travel statistics. So here we've got on the right looking at two different data sets combined, place of work and travel time to work. So you can see a vast majority of folks are working outside of the place of residence. I think it's about 85% is the number there, and the commute that's greater than 45 minutes is about half the folks. On the right side, we look at travel mode. No surprise there. Most people are driving driving alone in a single occupancy vehicle. Let's see. Here we look at our existing facilities. So on the left is our sidewalk inventory. We look at sidewalk on both sides, one side, or no sidewalks. And then on the left, we have our existing bicycle facilities, both on-street and trails. We look at safety data, identify safety hotspots. Most of your safety hotspots are on the Mountain View corridor. And then you also have one on 134th and Rosecrest that kind of jumps out. And I think there's one serious injury there. Next thing we look at is your level of service of your roadway network. And so on the left here, we have a diagram that kind of illustrates what level of service means. So we kind of grade the level of service from A to F. And what we plan for is a level of service D or greater. So we can't plan for a level of service A everywhere. It would be impractical. You'd have 10-lane roads everywhere. So what you can see here on the left is your level of service, and for the most part, level of service is pretty good. Keep in mind that we're looking at a daily level of service. So some facilities might be, over capacity during peak periods, but this kind of gives us a really high-level overview of what your level of service looks like. Really, we've got some issues popping up on 126 on the east side, and then on Herriman Main Street.
Sure, let's go with that.
On Herriman Main Street, we're next down towards the west side.
That's where the light is supposed to go right there.
Which one?
The Herriman Main Street. Where the red is.
64th and Herriman Main.
Yes. Kind of next down.
It will be
the
widened to
power.
a 3-lane section and have the signals.
So then we start looking towards the future. So here is our 2030 land use translated again into our traffic analysis zones, and these are key inputs to our travel forecasting tools that we use to predict what your traffic will be in the future. So we started with the Wasatch Front Regional Council's travel demand model inputs, and then we went through them with the city's input to provide revisions to them to better reflect what you guys know is going to occur out here. Again, with Blake's comment, Olympia Hills, we didn't really touch that. So this kind of assumes whatever Wasatch Front Regional Council is assuming for the area.
Remember, Wasatch Front does like a 50,000 foot level model.
Yeah.
So we have to dial it into the city level. So there has to be much input to kind of get the micro details of it.
And so here's what that translates into some travel forecasts for 2030. This is if we don't do anything to the transportation system, but assume the growth that will occur within the city. So you can see that our level of service along a lot of key facilities goes orange and in red. And then looking further out, this is 2050, so we do the same exercise. We really go into this land use data and make sure it's reflecting what you guys are expecting, and then we forecast it. So here's our no bill for 2050, even more problems with congestion, with a lot of facilities going over capacity. So then we use that to inform our capital facilities plan. And so with that information and input from the city, we develop, a project list. And this project list is phased into 3 phases. Phase 1 out to 2030, phase 2, 2040, phase 3, 2050. And you can see it's very much front-loaded, but the growth you guys are experiencing is really front-loaded and very fast. So here's all the widening projects and the new projects we've identified. Here are the signals. So the one we were just talking about right here, the signal. Again, this is phased out the same way. The red being, or blue being phase 1, green phase 2, orange or yellow phase 3. And then we model that. So we take those same inputs and we put all these projects into the model and then reforecast and see what that does. And so you can see is with those projects, it really kind of solves a lot of the issues we were seeing with capacity if we don't do anything. Now you're not always going to solve every capacity issue, but this really helps pretty significantly. And then here's looking at 2050 with all of the projects. So that this 2030 is just phase 1 projects, and the 2050 is with all of the projects we've identified.
You guys found, right?
Yeah.
I'm curious to see how you guys are gonna fix it.
I met with UDOT yesterday and discussed that. I'm curious to see how some of the things are going to work too.
And then here's our future functional class. So basically what your roadway network is going to look like with all of those projects we've identified completed. Here we show the new facilities in the dash, and the color represents the functional class. Minor clusters, major clusters, minor arterials, and major arterials. And then here's just a glimpse at your cross-section standards for your roadways. So here are our local cross-sections, the collector cross-sections, and you can see here how we can incorporate bicycle facilities and race meetings into these cross-sections. And then here are the arterials. And then finally, here are existing and planned bicycle facilities. So with those cross-sections, we can accommodate bicycle facilities, and here's what that kind of looks like built out. And then here's existing and planned transit. Just to give you guys an idea of what the region's planning for. So this is based upon the Wasatch Front Regional Council's Regional Transportation Plan for 2050, and showing what they have plans. And the main thing to point out is their corridor preservation for the extension of light rail, extending from South Jordan down and then through. So they have corridor preservation coming south here and also east. So they don't know. It's so far out they don't know exactly what that would look like. But
So how far out is this projection?
This is projecting 2050.
2050.
So in the next 30 years, the entire southwest corner of the valley gets nothing.
As far
Zero.
as transit is concerned.
Has anyone used
But Draper needs a whole lot more, I understand.
Has anyone used the VS shuttle yet?
I've seen it around.
Got some colleagues that have used
Everybody
it.
that's used it, I've heard good
Yeah, it's-
response from, but I haven't heard a lot of people that use it.
2 to 3 times the population is gonna fund
Yeah.
one side.
Same story.
Now, another thing to point out, and I can't remember, their plan is the 2050 plan, and they have the same phases, so 2030, 2040, 2050. We didn't show the phasing on here. The corridor preservation certainly doesn't show any specific, transit mode or facility, but along it, not as it extends south, but along the corridor preservation towards the east, they do have I think it's a future enhanced bus service, so that might be a BRT or something. And I can't remember what phase that's in, but it's probably phase 3, 2, 3.
The unfunded
Yeah.
phases.
Yeah, this is what.
So, and then the existing service remains unchanged, so. And that's all we have, so, we'll be rolling this all into our plan and presenting it to open houses.
We're going to take the projects and put estimates to each one of those, and then we work with Zions Bank Corporate Finance. That's who we contracted with to do the impact fee analysis. We'll come up with the projections for the cost and the projections for the growth. Develop an impact fee. We're anticipating working with the Homeowners Association to give them a review of that, probably in February sometime, and then back to that council and planning commission meeting. So it's rolling pretty fast, and I don't know if you have any questions right now. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you for
Thank
your
you.
help, we appreciate it. All right, we'll move on to 3.2, presentation of soil contamination on properties in Herriman City. And Blake?
Oh, that one was exciting. So this is a presentation we were going to give in the strategy session a few weeks ago. We didn't get a chance to get to it, so gave me a little more time to refine it, get some more quality information. So here we go. Oh, my image went away, but it wasn't that great anyway. So some history lesson on the contamination in Herriman. There are some contaminated soils in Herriman. Let's put that out there. There was a handful of studies done back in the 90s to identify where it came from, what it was, who did it, and most of it actually comes from the late 1800s and early 1900s from mining operations that were done, not even associated with Kennecott. Somebody would go up the canyon, set up a mill, get what they needed out of it, put all their waste rock in the creek, go broke or whatever, move away. Someone else come up and do it again, and every time they did that, the water would come down from Butterfield Canyon, get into the irrigation canals, and apparently, reading the history lesson was pretty exciting about the relationship between the miners and the farmers. And it seemed like these mills were burning down every couple of years. I don't know if the farmers were burning them down or what, but kind of funny. So anyway, that's where most of the contamination came from that we see in Herriman. And that's a lot of the reason why Kennecott is not responsible for cleaning up a lot of it. There's some that happened by Kennecott, but most of it was by these other companies. So the less historic operations, Peter fell asleep on me, but the less historic operations were Kennecott in the 1960s. They did some mining, put some of the waste rock into Butterfield Canyon, and some of the water came into that. So some of it is. So in 2001, the EPA put out a record of decision. They called this whole area the Kennecott South Zone. And in the Kennecott South Zone, they have operable units. And there's a handful of them. The one that pertains to Herriman is the operable unit 3, called the OU3. And they had a couple of subunits in there. There's like Butterfield Canyon, Butterfield Waste Rock. They were subunits, but the ones that really matter to us are the Herriman residential soils and the Herriman agricultural soils. In the ROD, the Record of Decision, there were 3 options provided to remediate or do what we needed to do to move forward with these soils in the OU3. Well, every operable unit got options looked at, but the OU3 had 3. The first option that was provided or offered in it was total cleanup. Come in, scrape everything off of everywhere, bring new topsoil in, put it down, and the cost of that was astronomical back when they did this study, millions and millions of dollars. And then they would have had to get approval to go on everyone's property. And then this was a farming community at that time. The bread and butter was farming. And there was a lot of concern about bringing in these soils and having them sterile. not being able to grow anything for years and years, and basically wiping out the economy that Herriman had at the time. So that option got thrown out. So then the next option they looked at was leave in place, don't do anything. So every environmental document seems to have a do nothing action in it. This one, no different. And so there was concern with that what if somebody developed on it and there was nothing done? There was a lot of risk. So they came in and said, okay, we got these residential soils where people already live, and we've got these agricultural soils where people just farm. And they said, what if we clean up the residential soils based on if the property owner wants to clean them up, and leave the agricultural soils and let Herriman or whoever's in charge at that time have controls over what happens when that develops. Because they knew development was going to happen someday. They just didn't know when at the time. So that was the one they went with. So they went to property owners and got approval by some of them. That's what this map shows. Is who was cleaned, who was left in place, and who the agricultural soils were generally just left in place. And so we moved on with institutional controls. That's what was recommended, and that's what we went forward with. So in our OU3 institutional controls, we oversee all remediation within the Herriman boundaries for projects in the operable unit 3. We have this map that we've been keeping updated over the years because that's part of our requirement to have a map and keep it updated, and we have to report every 5 years to the state what's going on. We also had to adopt or have a remediation plan for all new developments. They have to submit it. We have to have a zoning that works with the contaminated soils, and we have to have a process that they have to go through. We do have to go. And so we kind of felt that this was a little bit more specialized knowledge than what we really had. It's pretty detailed when you get into different types of waste. They got so many acronyms. There's RCRA, CERCLA, T-CLIP, Bevel. There's all sorts of stuff, and then they start throwing them out. My eyes kind of glazed over. So we hired an environmental consultant to come in and help us oversee these projects. This consultant isn't hired by the developers. We hire them. They're like they're our consultant. And we looked around for a bunch, and this person that we hired, their name's Earth Touch Engineering, and they do a lot of work up in Park City in Summit County, and so they bring in a lot of knowledge, a lot of experience with mining waste, and so everything that's been done since I've been here has been overseen by this company, and they basically monitor the work, review the plans, and review all the final reports when the cleanup's done, and make sure it all meets EPA standards. And they coordinate back with the state forest. So the latest project that we're doing right now is the Hidden Oaks project. They are getting ready to clean up their site. They haven't done any cleanup yet. There's been a sewer project going on up there. And so what they've been doing is monitoring the material that comes out, and if they run into any contamination, they're storing it temporarily on a site right over in here where there's already some contamination. So they're storing it temporarily there. They're supposed to start cleaning up in February or March, maybe earlier. They're trying to get an agreement with Kennecott to haul the material up there and dump it. And it's been tough for them, I think. So they might be looking at other things. But they have to clean up to the levels that I've shown here. Those are in the Herriman ordinance. Are these levels. There's a little section up here at the elementary school that's actually in operable unit 6. So they are going to be cleaning that site up as well. And they have to work through the state on that one. So there's one contractor that's going to do this cleanup effort. The state's going to have their people out there. We're going to have our consultant out there. It's going to be like a circus. It'll be fun. But
Wait, are they doing just periodic testing as they're digging these soils to?
So they have a gun called NexRF. And they
Okay.
have a guy on site at all times. And the soils, if you dig up the lead and arsenic, it's got a different color. And so if they see anything like that, they start shooting it. And they see what the level is. If the level's within these ranges, it goes in one side, and if it's over it, it goes to the spot where they're holding it until they come do this full cleanup. Okay. And so this is just the sewer line. So Ivory can't really move much forward with other phases of this development except for phase 1 that's underway until they get it all cleaned up. So they have a huge interest in getting this cleaned up right away.
So we test for lead and arsenic.
Lead and arsenic. The record of decision, that's all they found. And lead exists with arsenic, but arsenic never exists without lead. That's what they found. So, yeah, the requirement in their remediation plan for this development is all the contaminated soils will have to be removed off-site, hauled to a approved repository. That, once they go away, we don't care as long as it's approved.
Right.
Our consultants monitor where it goes, how much it is, what gets stored. This stuff, so this exemption, it's through the law, through Congress, it's called the bevel level exemption. And if it's created by mining waste and it has some certain requirements met, then it gets this bevel exemption. But it only has that exemption while it's in place. If they pick it up and move it somewhere, you have to document it, or you lose your bevel exemption. And then most of these repositories will not accept material if it's not bevel exempt. So,
And when you move it, you gotta monitor that relocation, which is one too.
so we do have one repository in the city that we've been aware of. We've been talking about it. I come up with some pretty cool numbers on this one, by the way. I just wanted to read them out loud. So we've relocated stuff here over the years. We've got about 180,000 cubic yards of material stored on site there. We've had an agreement in the past with Kennecott to haul the material there. There were no tipping fees. It was about an 11-mile haul from here to Blue Water. And if you go with how much material's there, with the 11 miles, it was going to be about 225,500 total miles of hauling at 36 tons per load. It's a semi-truck with a pup, full loaded, back and forth. So, and there was no tipping fee. So, I don't know how much it is per mile. Say it's $5 per mile, looking like $1 million or so. And then there's other things on top of that. You have to monitor it the site while it's being dug. There's equipment time and stuff. So, Intermountain Regional was the other landfill that we've looked at. It's down in Fairfield. It's a 32-mile one-way trip. So 64 miles round trip. So if you were to haul there, it'd be about 656,000 total miles traveled. And they were saying it would be around $10 per ton to dump. So that's about $3.3 million for dumping, plus all the additional miles for hauling. The other one is Wasatch Regional. It's out in Tooele. It's on the other side of the lake towards Magpur. It's a 60-mile one-way trip. So to break that one down, it's about 1.23 million miles total haul time. $40 per ton is what they charge, so about $13 million for dumping there. Some fun facts. If you hauled 5 days a week, 3 trucks an hour, it'd take you 60 weeks to haul this, 60 work weeks. So, more than a year.
Bloody hill, funny hill.
And then for air pollution people, that to haul the Wasatch Regional would create 3 million pounds of CO2 emissions for this haul. So probably contaminating the environment more than just leaving it in place. Okay, so there's a map that came out of the record of decision.
We're
Blue
not
Water's
putting
here.
anything else on that side. No.
Blue Water's here.
We're looking to get stuff
Herriman's
off.
over here. So our repository's about right in this area, so that's the 11-mile haul. And then this is our booklet that we have adopted from, it was before I worked here, it must have been adopted mid-2000s. Talks about the requirements in the LU3, what has to be done, steps for remediation.
Sorry, go back one, just because you have to have my brain a minute. Why is it our problem here that, because we took it over and we chose that third option,
So-
institutional control?
I don't think we chose the option, EPA gave that to us.
So they just said you deal with the problem,
These
you
are the
pay
3
for it,
options, that's the decision we have, so when Herriman gets there,
you have to
you
pay
decide how
for
you
it.
wanna handle the material.
You have to pay for the contamination by some other entity.
Well, there's 2 different issues. What he's talking about earlier was our property. We have a repository on our properties. The institutional control is something we decided to do.
So Danzies are paying for all their stuff to go there.
Right, why did we allow, who put all this stuff in our
Yeah, why did
repository,
we
why
allow all
didn't
that to
we
be
make
dumped on our
them pay
property?
for it?
So there was an early development there that had contamination in the Fazio Lake Farm. And so they piled up all the material there and then gave us the land. So we didn't have the land until the repository was made. And that
There's a
was
little caveat to that, that was right still under county control to start the process.
right. So the county gave them the right to
to store it.
Oh, so the county created a
Started it.
repository.
And it was a public property, so we got it.
We incorporated right in the middle of all that. We had to set those conditions they were planning.
But then more soil has been dumped there since.
So when we did
I mean,
5600
I've been here 10
West,
years and I've watched stuff be dumped there.
so when we built 5600 West, we put some more material on there. When we did Main Street, we put some more material on there. So we've done it with our own projects because we don't have another place to dump it. Kennecott wouldn't take it. It was fairly expensive and we had budgets to try to meet, sort of going out to Willa. So that's how the dirt got there. So right now, what we're looking at,
Was the reason that we were able to put more there is because it had already been
it's already
designated?
designated repository.
Right.
So what we're looking at now is because we have the controls, we are looking at taking some of the material and using it for embankment under roads and some other things. So, you know, we showed you what it's gonna take to haul off. That's gonna be extraordinarily difficult. The real solution is finding construction projects where this material can be incorporated and then doing that and putting it into those. We're not gonna be able to haul it to the deposit.
Also,
And that
that
uses
site,
spelled out in the rod, that we can use it under roads.
And since we're in control, we get it designated.
But I thought that we had this discussion about using it under roads and it wasn't good soil to use under roads because it's not good compactable soil.
that's correct.
We're gonna have
So
to
they have to
screen
be selected where you use the material.
We're gonna have to embankment or off the sides, we have slopes. We can use it there. We just, right under the road might not be the best place. We'd have to sort it. We might have to mix it with some
It's got a
gravel.
lot of clay in it, so it's not
Right.
good road
Terrible.
material. But in parks and stuff, it works for you, it's one he uses. By the way, also the soils that's there, even as it's hauled off and then dumped again, it brought a lot of that, just a natural mixing. So as you move it and mix it more, it brings the levels down and But it's just a hard process.
But you're right, there's green waste inside of everything. We gotta prepare the soil, but we're right now looking at places we can use it in various projects over time and bring it down.
And I had personal involvement in that cleanup back in the 90s, and we asked the feds and the local people out of Colorado to take blood samples out of the people who lived right in it and didn't farm it for years. Nothing came back. They did find some lead. The first time find out they had lead paint in their house.
I did wanna bring that up.
Stuff they found had nothing to do with
The record of decision talked about a couple of things with these soils. They talked about leachability and bioavailability. So leachability is its ability to
Thanks.
rainwater coming on it, leaching down into the groundwater. This stuff has a really low leachability. The acronym for it is T-clip. It's got a low T-clip. So leachability is not a concern. Ground
What about
contamination. And bioavailability is, if you ingest it, how it dissolves and goes into your blood. It's got a really low bioavailability. That's why if you look at our standards for 1,600 parts per million and 100 for arsenic, they're a lot higher than the EPA standard, and the ROD talked about that. Because this had such a low, it's not a lot higher, but it's a little bit higher. It's what the ROD said, you can go within this range, so we chose that, the city chose that range at the time. It's because it had low leachability and low bioavailability, we were allowed to go to that elevated level. Other parts of the county have other things happening, and they have lower restrictions, but
No
it's because of
reminder,
that.
you know, back then it got designated as a Superfund site, which really never made a full-blown Superfund site, because they really come in and clean everything out and haul it off. That's our struggle, because it's designated that, signed off as that.
Which would have
We
qualified for federal funds.
Brownfield funds, and it's just been a frustration for a long
Right.
years.
The one last
Been
thing,
lobbying our
We're kind of in
Congressional
between, we're in the
delegation
middle
to
of the road.
change that.
Go back and forth. That's right. So we missed that.
I'll tell you later.
the one last thing I wanted to point out is that, if development happens outside this operable unit 3, so we talked about the school site and the OU6,
Yeah.
they have to work with whoever's in charge of that. It might be the US EPA, it might be the state, it might be the county. I think OU6 is actually the state. So I've been talking with Doug Bacon at the state, he's the representative over that. We're requiring that site to just give us a letter that the state's been okay with it. And so they're waiting for the same thing we are on that letter, that final agreement to get done, and then we're gonna approve everything, and they'll be able to start moving forward with their soil remediation. We wanted to have them get it done this winter, because the dust is a lot lower, and it just keeps that risk out, because It's not that the dust is gonna be super dangerous with the lead and arsenic in it, it's just that dust is a nuisance in general, so we wanna keep it down.
Okay, well, this is good, I mean, this should help settle people's concerns about it.
Any other questions? Alright, we'll move on to item 3.3, Rosecrest Development Agreement. I'm gonna guess that we're gonna talk about 3.3 and 3.4 together, as,
The same person, yeah.
they are,
Do one as the
we are gonna, okay. Let's go with those.
So this is, item 3.3 and 3.4. So it's an amendment to the Rosecrest Development Agreement and the Wasatch Development Agreement. You've seen this, probably one or two times before, but we're getting more specific and we're gonna give you a draft development agreement after the presentation. So Wasatch purchased some property from Rosecrest, identified as pod 35 and 39. Those pods were subject to the Rosecrest Development Agreement. So we're gonna amend the Rosecrest Development Agreement and take those properties out. And we're going to amend the Wasatch Development Agreement to include those properties in. We're also going to add some design guidelines, and then we are going to request some other changes, which I'll talk about in a minute.
In a minute, objections in the budget.
Also, Wasatch is requesting a zone change, but that's not part of this amended MDA, but I bring it here to show you what exactly is going on, so you have a full understanding. So, to give you some context, which one is this? This is to orient you. This is the Real here, Mountain View, and Real Vista. On the 2008 general plan, this property is identified as commercial and mixed use. That's a circled area. On our current zone, it is zoned C2 and MU2. MU2 is this purplish color, commercial is this reddish color. This is how they are requesting the zoning change. So this is for parcel 35. Corner down here, they want to have an RM, the rest a CU2. Parcel 39, which is just across the street. This is the parcel we were just looking at. This is the RM, and the red is the CU2. So that's has wound its way through the Planning Commission and will make its way to you.
And they're not requesting any additional units with this?
Additional units.
That won't be part of this development group. They'll be looking at a general look at the
Well,
where that's going to be.
But as part of this, there's no
No,
unit
it's just,
changes?
they're
as part
just
of the
changing,
agreement?
they're consolidating the mixed use into one and then also the final.
So this is the site plan. So to me, this is the shiny car that they have shown you. So I want to have that be part of the development agreement, that this is what they're gonna build. And I'll show you how I've done that.
And then that's gone through the planning commission for
Yeah,
recommendation.
I'll show you that here in a second. So the Rosecrest Development Agreement amendments. So it's gonna be amended to remove pods 35 and 38. Specifically, the legal description in the development agreement will be amended to remove those two legal descriptions, and it'll be re-recorded. That's pretty easy. Yep. Okay, so the Wasatch Development Agreement, this is where they've requested some things and the city is requesting some additional provisions be added. First of all, the property would be rezoned as set forth above, as we showed you earlier. The legal description would be amended to include pod 35 and 39 and it'd be re-recorded. And then, as I listened to the discussions in the presentation, I wrote some notes to myself. And so I've added some things to this development agreement of representations that I think were made to the city. And I think the council and the planning commission agreed with those. so I'll go through those and see if you agree. First of all, ownership. They made a play that they would retain ownership and it would have a high quality. So I've added a provision to this amended development agreement that no transfers without the city's consent. There are basically a couple exceptions to that. A transfer to a related entity is not a transfer subject to this. So if they transfer to an LLC, for example, to own the property, it's not a transfer subject to this. And when you read it, your eyes are gonna roll, but it was pretty complicated. But what I did is I incorporated basically the Internal Revenue Code that says you can't have a loss if you sell property to a related party. So I used that concept as related party. And then financing, getting a mortgage trustee is not considered a transfer. The commercial design guidelines would be added. Now these guidelines have been reviewed and approved by the Planning Commission, but they're going to be an exhibit, so you'll see them and approve them as part of the approved amended development agreement. The site plan would be added. The site plan has been reviewed and approved by the Planning Commission, and it includes a parking component. Let me go back and show you what the objectives. So two, even though they're shown differently, this is a parking structure and that's a parking structure. So this site plan contemplates parking. Now, to note, Wasatch has requested that the city reimburse the developer for the cost of 2 parking facilities, which I just showed you. Estimated cost and timing, about $16 million in 2020 and about $8 million in 2023. This is not in this development agreement. They're going to bring it back and talk to us in January with their proposal. It's likely to use TIF, maybe some county money, some other things. That is not part of this.
So, John, just a quick question, you know, should we come to an agreement on that? How will it be an amendment to the MDA then to include that in there, or will it be a separate
Probably
document?
a participation agreement.
Participation,
It depends
okay.
on where the money is coming from.
Okay.
So phasing, I thought it was important to add something about phasing. And I'm not necessarily too worried about these guys, but some of the other developers will put in the residential and run away. Or not put in the park, or not put in the park improvements. So all these development agreements, I'm saying, put a phasing in there. Tell us what you're gonna build first, second, third, etc. They also talked about the roads. They made a representation that all the roads would be private. So I've added that all the roads will be constructed and maintained by the master developer or an HOA. Then I added this thing, my thought there is, with the original development agreement, which is about a 200-page document, this amendment, there could be a conflict. So let's deal with the conflict. How do we deal with inconsistencies and conflict? So I created this thing that you have to use the better quality or greater quantity, or the more stringent requirement, or if it's in Exhibit F1, which are the design guidelines, that trumps or controls over Exhibit F. So it creates a priority, and then we get to decide. Reasonable, city's reasonable interpretation. Any questions?
How much of this has been, since you've added those things, has been discussed with the developer?
I think all of it.
Not correct.
Oh, I thought Gordon gave this to you
No,
already.
I've not had a chance to reply to some of those that I have some pretty large concerns with.
Okay. So, none, apparently. I guess we'll have some arm wrestling.
We'll have some conversations about that.
Yeah, so here is the actual development agreements without exhibits. I realize they're still in draft. That's the end of my presentation.
Okay. Any questions or discussions by the council on that? Okay. All right, I'm sure we will hear about that one again.
Yeah, I'll have some large questions about, obviously, how we're gonna help pay for this, right? I think
Yeah,
it's
we're gonna do
important.
that.
It's
But
a
we're
big
doing that in
item.
January. I think it's important that we figure out how to make this happen, because it's huge to us as far as a commercial development. And it makes way more sense to do these parking structures.
Well, we know we don't have that money sitting around, so we have
Right,
to
we should have
go
money.
to all the resources we can. That's that, mission January.
Okay, and they're gonna come back and they're gonna, deal with, request two issues, and that's density. So their development agreement has an average of 4.5 units per acre. Rosecrest has 4 units per acre, so we're gonna have to wrestle through that. And they'll also want a sign package. So they're gonna come back and this will either be amended or it'll be added to this original.
So this is just the first step in the process.
This is just the first step,
Okay,
but at least it's on paper now.
it's on paper now. All right, we will move on to item 3.5, discussion regarding the Rose Creek outfall storm drain line. Blake.
I'm gonna defer to Jonathan on this one. He's done a lot of work on this, so it's only fair to let him present it.
Alrighty. So the purpose of this presentation is to present a few options, but we also wanted to present these in a informal discussion, foster comments, questions throughout the presentation. What I thought I would do is I thought I'd start with a little bit of background. So there's a significant amount. I know you guys, this might actually be stuff you already know, so, but I thought it'd be good to just at least back up just a little bit. And so there's about 2,350 or so acres that is planned to outfall at Rose Creek. Planned, and is dependent essentially on that. And so each area, and you can break them up into 4 different ones, and I've got them colored a little bit differently, and I gave them names based on either a key feature or pond in that area, or after its development. And so each one of those areas has a confluence. So you can see it's kind of hard to see on that, but there's a dot in each one, and it represents the place where runoff will eventually end up. Now on the Mountain Ridge one, it's conceptual. It actually doesn't exist right now. There is a point, a confluence point right by the new elementary school, but anyway. So
Now
those
dots are ponds?
Those dots are not ponds. They represent where the runoff converges or concentrates to. Right now. However, so to your point, community college, that one does represent a future pond, essentially. So everything within that Real Vista area will come to a confluence at the large, what I've been calling the Salt Lake Community College pond. Park House does have a pond at its confluence as well. Juniper Canyon, that's at the end, that's actually a pipe sticking out the other side of the Academy, or excuse me. Yeah, Academy Park Bay, I think that's that. So, and currently, because we're dependent on this outfall that we don't have yet, development in each area is required to retain all the runoff in its area. It cannot discharge. And right now, as a result, there are about 28 acres of pond footprint that exists. Well, actually, that does also include a community college pond, which is a future pond. So Salt Lake County will allow a discharge 0.02 CFS per acre into Rose Creek. So that represents for this area total, we can discharge around 50 CFS if we're going to discharge during a time when Rose Creek is flowing, or during a storm event, rather. If it's not on an event, we can actually discharge more. So net pressure pumping, and one thing to know about pumping, I just thought I'd just throw this out. If you're doing a pumping system, you have to have a fail-safe so that all that runoff has a place to go in case there's a malfunction in the pumping system. So there's a significant amount of retention needed for a pumping system. And that Salt Lake Community College pond is sized accordingly. Alright, so jumping right in to some alternatives, I just wanted to again point out, I kind of zoomed in on the confluence points of each one of these basins. Each one has to make it to that Welby-Jacobs Canal eventually. So now, these alternatives that I'm presenting today are focused in the area up north and up by the Riverton area in yellow. So alternative one is conveyance to Rose Creek through along Welby-Jacobs Canal, and that's something that's been in the master plan, has been planned on for a while. It's in the current adopted plan, and currently we're working on a master plan that also currently has that as well, but we can make adjustments to that as necessary. While that's taking up some time to warm back up, a point worth mentioning is that option, alternative one, is an option that both Riverton City, the property owner, and the developer have expressed concern with that option. So, and then looking into
So I
these
have a
alternatives.
question about option one, this was master planned this way?
Yes.
How did we master plan it across a different city? What did we master plan that out?
So you see our roads master plan that we had earlier tonight showed roads through the county. I mean, you have to show where it goes, so that was always the plan, was to convey it across there.
Get it to Rose.
And when the master plan was done, they looked at all the options and did a ditch, because it was an open farm field, so a ditch made sense to go through the farm field.
So that was the next question, and I mean, this might be jumping the gun, but conveyance to Welby-Jacobs Canal, what does that mean? Does that mean?
Conveyance along Welby-Jacobs.
So that means what?
So, and I'm going to jump in and give some options, but so it's taking it either through a gravity system or a pump system along and parallel to, and on the west side of Welby-Jacobs Canal.
We can jump off board for a second if you don't mind.
Go ahead, Lee.
We met with the Welby-Jacobs board. We talked to them, we talked to their engineer to explore the option of going into the canal with stormwater. The board actually looked like they were going to be amenable to it. And then they started discussing, well, this city wants to do it, this city's wanted to do it for years, this city's wanted to do it, and they backed off. And they said, no, we're going to be okay with you running a pipe within the right-of-way, which it pinches to like 4 feet in a couple places, so there's not really a lot of room to do that. They said, we can let you put a pipe within our right-of-way, but we're not going to allow any stormwater in the channel. They have it in policy that they wouldn't allow stormwater in the channel, so we were kind of exploring the option of maybe changing the policy, and the opportunity was ripe right now because the irrigation company wants to put a turnout at Rose Creek. Riverton is constructing a structure to go underneath Rose Creek, or the Welby-Jacobs Canal right now. So Riverton's trying to get approval from the canal company to put this structure in to go underneath. The canal company's saying, well, we'll give you approval to do a turnout. So Riverton then takes the plans to the county, and the county says, well, we can't get a turnout unless you put stormwater in the canal. So now we got this circle going on, and we kind of jumped in the middle and said, all right, what can I do? And we got shot down. So we opened the can to see if it would happen, and it felt, their engineer said, oh, this sounds like it might be a good thing, so that's when we went to the board, and then the board decided to go with it. So we're kind of back to where they told us about, I think, 10 years ago. No.
So option one is doing an open ditch along the canal to Rose Creek.
Among three others, so that's four sub-alternatives to one. Okay. This is a really exciting presentation. But suffice to say, as a result of that meeting with Welby-Jacobs and the board, they did say that they would look into the possibility of us encroaching into that corridor. We just can't do it. So then option two is pumping right, so it's taking, instead of going north, you would work west, you would pump, that's uphill, you pump that up to the existing Sentinel Ridge storm drain system. Alternative 3 then is discharging into 138, a new system in 138 South. Update here is, based on the recent conversation with Riverton staff, there is no capacity in that system, and then a new storm drain system would be required to be installed. Alternative 4 is kind of like a close cousin to the do nothing alternative, but it's not. So we're not providing an outfall, and we would require retention on all those 4 areas in, forever, right? And I'm going to get into that just a little bit more.
Real quick on the, what was it, the third option there, 138. When you said a new system, is that upsizing a current system or running a parallel system?
Parallel, new, and independent.
And how far would that have to run in order to the east in order to accomplish that?
So you would go along 138th, 40th west, and then go up north to, here, we'll just do a quick spoiler alert, how about that?
Sorry.
No, it's fine. So I flipped the map on you,
Yep.
Clint. So north is to the right. So now you go east, and then you go north along 40th west.
So pretty short run there.
Still outfall to the road.
Yeah, so it's, I can't remember the length on it. Oh, 4,000 feet. Got it right there. I'm glad I wrote it there. So it's just short of a mile.
You'd run into issues similar to that we've seen on other projects. You're going across people's front yards. You've got other utilities. Down 138th, you've got Bluffdale and Riverton. So there's 2 water lines, there's 2 irrigation lines, there's 2 everything in there. So you're running out of room really fast. There's a lot of risk looking at putting a new pipe down a road like that. You're going to be relocating stuff and getting into people's front yards.
Is that a road?
138th is a road.
Is it
All the-
our road?
No. It resides within Bluffdale and Riverton, but there's a piece of it that says it's Herriman City property. It was a remnant from property exchanges with Rosecrest, so it was Rosecrest property. But it's been driven on for more than 10 years, so I don't know how John would interpret that
So
as
is this
being.
the piece we've been told the last couple of weeks that we own property or we own right of way or?
So we own that property on the river side, so it's the center line of
All the
138,
way to 40th?
all the way.
So if you
all the way
see
to
this
40.
little triangle right here, we own that little triangle, and we own down somewhere into here, like half the road.
We own property.
We own the fee. We traded that with Rosecrest Vineyard.
We own it.
So it is our road, it's not, we don't own it right.
The county records show it as Herriman City.
So we can't.
I haven't done
Have we
any
been
research to
providing any
see-
maintenance or anything else to that road?
Did we provide a right of way for the
So
other
it's-
storm drain that's in the road? Or does that precede our
So
ownership?
somebody else would have a pretty strong argument.
It was before our ownership, I'm sure it was
Whether we
Rosecrest
own
that.
that or not.
And there's pieces of storm drain, so they'll gravity flow in the gutter, drop into a storm drain several hundred feet down. So there's hodgepodge storm drain. That's an older part of Riverton.
And we just own that piece from 138 to 40 west, yes. We still have a problem going north.
Oh yeah, north is public right of way for Riverton.
Actually, the 40th west would be easier just because there's fewer utilities. The real risk is having to loop the water lines going to the north. There's probably a lot fewer utilities and wider roads, so I think that'd be even a cheaper.
But
Piece
when
of
you
it's
go
still
down this
small.
road, you've got slope, so you get a smaller pipe. When you go this way, you're kind of going with the contour, so you get a bigger pipe. So you might get more space, but you got bigger pipe.
So flatter.
Yeah. Flatter makes the pipe get bigger.
So on alternative, again, so alternative 1, and I just wanted to iterate, I'm focusing on the yellow, which is everything north of the Herriman City boundary. And in here, we looked at 4 different alternatives. One was that open channel, Jared, which you mentioned. The second one, open channel along Welby Jacobs Canal. 1B is essentially a pipe in that same corridor. And then 1C is very close to 1B. The only difference is,
Back up, John.
Yes, sir.
Make sure that council understands what that means. It's in the Welby Jenkins Canal right away.
Right.
It's the service road one runs alongside it.
no, well, are you talking 1B?
1B.
1B is outside of and west of the Welby Jacobs Canal.
So
we would require right of way.
So it would require right of way from Riverton in order to accomplish that.
That's correct.
One C.
And that's similar for 1A as well.
Right.
This is true for all of alternative 1A, B, C, and D. The difference is for alternative C and D, we're going to encroach and push it closer into the Welby-Jacobs Canal. And we figure an estimation of about 5 feet closer to the potentially.
That makes sense to you.
So,
Yeah.
so right away would still be required even if we're able to encroach,
Just left.
just less.
That's why I was trying to get you.
Thanks for that.
Do we know under each of those alternatives the amount of right of way required for each?
So, it's a good question. We anticipate that I can't say exactly, but the open channel is gonna require probably
More.
20 feet more.
And correct me if I'm wrong, because it's right of way that would need to be obtained in another city, they basically would have the right to tell us what that had to look
Yeah.
like going through there.
Should
And
say
just-
no to open channel.
And to some extent, we have heard a little bit of feedback on that already as far as the open channel goes, right? They have expressed concern with that alternative. And then the last option, which was 1D, is it's being pumped along, all along the Welby-Jacobs Canal in a pressurized line.
So then it's just a smaller and it requires less right
A little smaller. Yep.
Your all-in cost though are
So, yeah, and I'd like to just step out and just talk a little bit about that. I think I would be remiss if I didn't mention a few things associated with that, which is, so a pressurized line, that would require, we would be pumping out of the community college pond and pressurize it and send it all the way to Welby, but that would mean that everything would have to first gravity down to the community college first and then get pumped up. So there is some portions of that blue line that would have a dual line. Gravity going down to community college, pump going out. Does that make sense? So there's a dual line for a good portion of that. The other item I wanted to make mention of on a pump system is they would have to be somewhat of an orchestrated timing requirement with the SCADA system in the community college pond and all upstream ponds. Say, okay, now you can release from this pond and go into the community college pond, and it's also got to orchestrate with the channel. So there's so we use SCADA software to kind of communicate. So they're all communicating, and so there's a bit of a potential for miscommunication.
That sounds like a lot more ongoing cost and the potential for
Correct.
conflict.
Correct.
you got
But
people, maintenance,
this is being
equipment.
done, we'll have to first do it, but it's an alternative.
So those, what was that, Sherry? Sorry.
I was just saying, you got, those is kind of stuff they orbits to their day pump systems, so.
Good, you were primed for the conversation. Now, alternative two, what was that? Sorry.
Well, the question that I'm gonna have here is what's the cost difference between the alternatives?
I've got at the very end, and I've got like this matrix that kind of shows a little bit of a comparison, the cost between all of them. It's not dialed in cost, but at least we give a bit of a comparison.
I'm curious about alternative 2. I don't think we've heard this one yet.
So similar to, so we have, and again, pointing out, for all these alternatives, down at the very bottom, you have to pump out of the community college and get it into Welby-Jacobs Canal. And then it has to be conveyed along Welby-Jacobs Canal. Again, this is all in blue, these are all the alternatives. And then, so for this, once you get to the Herriman City boundary, there would need to be essentially a holding pond or a wet well for it to pump from that point up to Sentinel Ridge, storm drain system. And then that, we would only be able to discharge when Rose Creek is empty. But the pro with this, the outfall to Rose Creek does not require additional right-of-way through Riverton City, however easement potentially might be required along their public roadway. The con with this again, so this is a pumping system, so you've got SCADA to include with that. Again, it could be complex. So the fail-safe components require full retention still, regardless, upstream in all of the ponds. So we still need every single one of those ponds to hold all of that. And then Sentinel Ridge, storm drain system capacity, this was a back of the napkin calculation, and so it was around 30 CFS, give or take, I'm gonna say 10 CFS, right? So for the amount of acreage that we have there, it's gonna take a few days, right, for us to empty all of these Herriman for that system if that were the. So that was a big comment I just wanna make sure I mentioned. Any questions?
Yeah, question, so I guess what makes it, my guess is that the Sentinel Ridge storm drain system up there, that is that Riverton's storm drain
That's
system?
Riverton's storm drain system.
Okay, so what allows us to pump and dump that into their system?
So to that point, Blake, you probably speak a little more, we would require a cooperative agreement, easement, and those are some things.
So it's an option, but it's subject to them allowing us to do
I've talked
so.
with their public works director, there's some capacity in there, and he said that they're amenable to looking at that. One thing to keep in mind is pumping costs are based on how much head you push the pond, so how much elevation you go. If you're pumping along the canal, it's pretty flat. Once you go up 138, you're raising 40 feet.
Right,
So your costs jump up considerably just to get it up to there.
To get it.
pipe to run it down that pipe.
okay.
And so, and
we're doing less at it.
yeah, you're basically having to pump off peak, so that pipe's gonna be full of water when they're flowing their stuff out. So we're waiting for the storm to leave, their ponds to get discharged, and then we go, okay, now it's.
Before we can start.
The other thing I wanted to show you is, this is the Riverton wet well, the secondary system, so that gives you a scope of size. So we wouldn't need that large of a wet well, but it would probably take several acres that we would have to dedicate to the park for the wet well as opposed to having the park. So just giving you kind of an idea. It wouldn't be that big, but it would be something like that.
That pond, they have an agreement with Willie Jacob to turn out into there, and Riverton has to run open gates. I guess last summer it was open the whole summer. They kept it full because the demand for secondary water is so high. So there's not a lot of capacity.
So to your point, Mayor, there are some costs associated with that kind of talk about a little bit more. Any other thoughts or discussion or questions on that option? So alternative 3, we've obviously touched on this, and so I'm going to go over it briefly again. Again, on all these alternatives, you've got to pump out of the Salt Lake Community College pond, put it into Welby Jacobs, convey it along Welby Jacobs, thank you, along Welby Jacobs to the new system along 138th, which we've spoken about. This would be a gravity system along 138th down to 40th, turning north, and then it would outfall into Rose Creek, and it's about 4,000 feet. Again, the alternative.
Wait, you have to pump this still?
No,
What are you
this
saying?
would all be
This-
gravity.
That's what I thought you just said.
This
pump.
pond will always be pumped.
Okay, so that's all.
It's possible I could have said that.
It's whether
it's
you
not.
get to a place, at this point, it's just gravity, it drops into it.
Right,
So once you get to a point of gravity feeds, but you have,
but
This
we're
is-
always, so that cost associated with pumping out of the SLC pond is always stagnant.
But
And everything you talked about with your communication, that's always gonna be there?
Now, it's a lot more simple if it's just community college pond, if we're pushing to a channel or a gravity system. So let me see if I can, if we are gonna do a gravity system from this point all the way up there, which you can do, you just have to pump it out of the pond and into either a channel or a pipe. And then it can gravity all the way over, right? If that is the way we convey it, then that system is a lot more simple. It can, because we have enough volume in that community college pond to hold everything uphill of it, so we don't have to, I've been calling it an orchestra, we don't have to orchestrate when things open and when they close. This would be a lot more simple.
So we wouldn't have to pump it up a certain distance, basically just get it over the dam.
Just get it over, yep.
This becomes a hole, so it's lower, so we just have to get it up high enough.
Yeah.
one thing to think about is from here to Rose Creek, I think you got like 4 or 5 feet of fall. It's so flat out there. And then as soon as you go up the hill, that's where you start getting the 30, 40 feet difference.
On this option, are we still limited on what our outfall can be?
It's always 0.02.
It's always 0.02.
The whole.
But can we utilize the full 50 cubic feet per minute or per second, or are we limited like we are on Sentinel Ridge where we're limited to the capacity?
So we can do, so because it's a new system, we could design it to the capacity that we need to discharge.
So we can take advantage of our full output.
That is correct.
If you come
And
in
if we
with
wanted
the
to time it
north, you're
so that
gonna
we're
have pressure
discharging on the
kick it
off
to
time, we could even discharge more. But that's more cost.
It's flat.
Is there any option discussed going straight down 40th West?
Say that again, sorry.
Coming out of the pond and going straight down 40th West, is that an option at all? Has that been discussed?
Along, if I'm hearing you right,
It's
right
coming
along
from
there.
Bluffdale.
So we met with Bluffdale and all that many years ago, and they weren't very excited about it, and we haven't approached it.
Riverton's been willing to work with us and Bluffdale.
We could go back and talk about it later.
Yeah.
I'm guessing they would require us to sit in the middle and never keep that road.
We could probably do something, but it's still expensive because you're running down an
That's just
asphalt
it.
road.
We aren't the ones. Anyway,
This is talking about it being a wider road, maybe less utilities.
It might be.
These contours kind of lay across like that. So as you look at that, I think if you go down 40, you're either dead flat or negative grade. So you would have to have a pressure pipe all over.
And similarly, to the, and which is a
Yeah,
good question, because
I think it's a
that was kind of
negative
brought
grade.
up in my mind, at least something we've exercised through the intent for master plan and capital facilities to service the areas around it. If we sent it down there, it would be short circuiting that mountain ridge and some of that other area. So we want to make sure we're able to service those areas as well. All right.
That's a great answer, thank you.
Alternative 4. Now, when I kept saying that community college pond and the channel was required, or excuse me, the channel and the pump was required for each alternative, it was somewhat untrue. If we retain and we require everything upstream of the community college, or excuse me, if we don't do an outfall to Rose Creek and each area has to hold its all runoff, we don't have to do that pump station and we don't have to do the conveyance along the Welby James Canal, right? Because we're holding it all in. And then no additional right-of-way be required and we minimize the infrastructure. Now, I do want to make sure we go over judiciously the cons associated with that. So there would be an increased potential for mosquitoes, obviously, right? 'Cause
Hence, we have mosquitoes, they do a great job.
the job security,
We're
get them to work on. So, and then we'll also have a possibility of wetland creation, which might result in wetland management. So then we also have an increase in potential to, you know, seeping into neighboring structures or parcels or whatnot. I actually can cheat because I have it right here. And then we have, so, and I mentioned we'd be minimizing the infrastructure when we do that. We do, however, need to increase the size of the ponds or the amount of capacity in the Juniper area. Currently, it's holding all the volume for runoff for everything that's developed, but it does not hold the volume for all of mountainous terrain, right? There's lots of acreage up there that is tributary to the Juniper Canyon area that is mountainous, and it's not developed, it isn't planned to be developed, and so we weren't planning on holding all that. So we would need to increase some of the capacity in that basin, so there would be a significant amount of grading to make that be able to hold everything. And then we would be, we would be, oh, excuse me, I skipped one. So safety hazards and mitigation associated with open water, and then dependence on infiltration. So when you depend on the infiltration, over time, ponds, a couple things happen is you silt up your ponds. So let's say you have a really high infiltration rate at the beginning. As time goes on, that starts to silt up, and then your infiltration rate decreases. then we have to dredge it, and then we have to remove it. So that dependency has some operation and maintenance implications. And then I wanted to point out that the amount of vegetation options that we have at the bottom of those ponds are seriously limited. Obviously not programmable because they'd be wet, right? And no turf, obviously. I went through that one pretty fast.
Do you have pros?
I did. I'll go back. We do minimize.
Sure.
That's why you missed it.
That's the pros.
Is there a pro to our community with retention as far as aquifer or anything to that effect?
Aquifer recharge.
I would be more worried about it seeping in and then daylighting somewhere downstream in someone's basement or in someone's yard.
But everyone
This guy-
downstream isn't in our city, right?
Ours is cheap as
That was
We
Sherry.
found this material that is pretty gravelly.
Sherry
So,
Horn.
I think gravel.
You can be reached at 555.
Recharge the canal.
So, it's just, this material that tends to be really gravelly. I've seen work go on down here, so there's a high potential for it to travel through the ground long distances and show up somewhere. And if they start dye testing it and find out it's us, then we're back to figuring out, finding alcohol that's in.
So how many acres of programmable turf could we possibly lose by doing alternative 4?
That's a good question. I don't know off the top of my head.
Is it a small number? Is it less than an acre? Is it 10 acres? What, I mean, do you have?
Didn't you come up with 28?
Well, 28 's what
28 acres
so
per pond.
even,
None of those are programmable.
yeah, so even if we discharge, and we have the ability to release all that runoff, that still has to be a holding pond for about 28 acres of footprint. How much of that would translate to being programmable, I would say it's nominal, and I just don't know the answer to that.
So
I wouldn't anticipate
we're
a
not
lot.
truly looking at, regardless, even with this option, we're not truly looking at an increase in programmable space simply by picking a different option.
Yeah, I would say that would not be, I wouldn't advise to depend on that.
We talked a little bit ago about taking a few days to make these ponds be emptied if you pumped them. If you had a wet season, you could have ponds chock full of water if you didn't have an outfall months.
I think it goes back to really the issue we just talked about. It's not so much that we reclaim that as open space. It's whether you have standing water and the issues that come with that for long periods of time.
We'd probably be talking about fencing them off and not letting anyone in there at some point in time. There's just risk for people getting in there and messing around.
Yep.
And there's, as we dive into these, we'll know more, so anyway, we can get into that, probably when we have a better idea what we're doing. But what I decided to do is, pull this into a matrix to highlight 3 things. So, one being capital cost. And when I say capital, just for iteration, I'm just talking about the cost to construct it. That doesn't include operation and maintenance costs. And then I gave an estimation of the operation and maintenance burden for each of those alternatives. And then lastly, the right-of-way required for each alternative. And that right-of-way is simply just the right-of-way that's, I wrote it down. Let's see. So the right-of-way is quantified for all the areas needed for those improvements outside of Herriman. So along Welby Jacobs Canal, all of those are 2 acres except for the first one, which is the channel. We would require 3. And again, that's just because you need a wider corridor for the channel. Option 2, again, pumping. I guess I'm not 100% accurate on saying none. We would probably need easement or a cooperative agreement at the least with Riverton City to discharge that system along the Sentinel Ridge system. But we're assuming at this point it's probably just in a cooperative agreement and perhaps not an easement or right away. Number 3, that's an acre for an estimated acre along the 40th West Corridor. And that last option again was no outfall. Obviously, we don't need any additional right away. And I represented those cost options with dollar signs. And you'll notice when that pops back up, there's a table on the bottom left of the graphic. So for each dollar sign, it represents a particular range.
Hurry, Sherry, hurry, hurry.
I've got it right here.
I think one of the, other than the dollar signs there, I think one of the, at least for me, one of the important takeaways is out of all of those options, with the exception of number 4, which is a do-nothing system and deal with all of those other potential consequences, but all of those other ones requires, they're not things that we can go and just do on our own. They require some type of approval or agreement with somebody else in order to allow those to even happen. So something has to be taken into consideration in each of those requests of which one's gonna be, I guess, a possibility or
I think they all are.
frowned upon.
I don't think our neighbors want all the issues of standing water that come up through. I mean, those are issues for them just as much as they're issues for us, so I'm not too
When we
worried
look
about
at,
finding some sort of middle ground. What I am curious about, now that we kind of have somewhat the full picture, is the money question, right? We collect impact fees for all of these things. Where's the money? What was the plan? Right, we said there's a master plan, but it's kind of alluded to that it was just, there will be a ditch there. That was the master plan. Is that what the impact fee study was based on, and the fees that were collected for that, et cetera? So I think that's the next part for us to consider in weighing the options is show us that collection. Where did the money come from? What have we collected? What have we used it on? What do we plan?
So Herriman is split into 3 areas for storm drain. This is the East Herriman portion. If you remember back 1 or 2 presentations ago on this item, it's OC 17 and OC 19 with ditch channel sections.
Yep.
And those had costs associated. I think I had a slide in it that showed how much the estimated cost was of that. And that cost would have assumed that it was paid for when everything was developed. We probably, I don't know what percentage of development we are there, maybe 60% or something. So we should have 50 or 60% of those dollars there. That was the $700,000 that was put into the budget this year. Those were the impact fees for the storm drain for the OC 17 section of that channel or something. I explained it a couple presentations ago, but we can revisit that too. I just don't have enough to talk about.
And that's fine, and whenever you can get it,
I think
at least for me, I'd
yeah.
like to see that, so I can weigh each one. And so,
But I think your point was very important there, Jared, and that is that was based on a plan that contemplated something that in all likelihood probably we are not gonna be allowed to do in the area. So what it was contemplated on, what we've been saving for is probably going to be less than what it's actually going to cost us to solve this issue.
But we can open pit it all the way to our border.
We could, that's what was planned. That's what we discussed with the property owner a couple years ago, doing that. And we were trying to work to get that done, and then the development came and some different ideas came along with that. So.
the other thing that I would like just a little bit more detail on is maybe a little bit better idea what the O&M burden would be for these different items. Low, moderate, high, in relation to what? I mean, because if it's, $1,000 versus $10,000, that's a much different conversation than if it's $10,000 versus $100,000 a year. And so if we could get some more information on that, because ongoing costs should be part of this conversation. We either pay it now or we pay it continually going up front. And so I'd like to see a little bit more of what that means of high versus low. Because if we have a low cost and we're going to spend a little bit more, but we're going to make it up in 5 years, to me that seems like something worth considering.
Are there any alternatives that you'd want to scratch off the list at this point so that we don't spin our wheels on something too much? Because we could probably spend 20-30 hours on each one of these going through and calculating these. So if there's anything we can get rid of, it'd help us out.
And we've already gone from about 20 options down to the ones that we can work. So now it's ready to get some direction. Okay, you have a couple that we've got to be looking at more closely on the numbers.
I think the do nothing option is not an option for
Do
us.
you think the con list is too long?
What's that? Do I think the con list is too long? If it's not now, it will be later, I guarantee that.
Well, it has to be an option until we have an agreement with
Yeah,
our neighbors.
we have to do nothing for now until we have.
No, and I don't disagree with you, but in terms of them spending some time on trying to come up with O&M of, you know, drilling down to these systems, again, this is one that I don't,
Well, that's the one
right
that-
now that I don't think we should spend a lot of time on because I don't think it's a great option for
And
us.
that report is very insignificant, it is some dredging, some maintenance, and clearing those type of things, and just give away. That's what it is.
A whole different.
It's pretty insignificant stuff. You just sit down with
Yeah,
charcoal numbers.
I wouldn't say do a whole bunch of work on that yet.
Right.
And
I would like to, if they're gonna have to spend some time to come up with those numbers, let's at least try and narrow it down to our preferred or one or two for them to spend time on, at least to try and give us a ballpark of what we're looking at on those. And then we know whether or not, again, that's a viable option that we want to pursue.
I appreciate that.
Personally, I'd like to see information on option 3, because I think in long-term ongoing, it might give us some more,
Sorry, go back to which one, three?
that's the down 138 across
And
4,000.
40th.
Yeah, 40th. I also, I'm not a fan of a pressurized pipe. I think, you know, anytime we start adding more maintenance, more, you know, the fewer pumps that we can have, the fewer, you know, pieces of equipment that can fail, the better off we're gonna be, long term, is my opinion.
I say I don't know until we can match details of the money with options. I'll just say in general, I don't like the idea of ongoing operations and maintenance.
Yeah,
Rather not pay
it's
for
always,
that
Okay,
stuff
gravity
and not
it's
fed.
always going down, it's just, if it's large or small.
But,
Well,
but I don't know that
your true gravity feed systems, with the exception of the initial pump out of the retention site, would be option 1 or option 3. Right?
And
So-
those are kind of the ones that I'm
So
most
those are the two that long-term are going to have the least amount of ongoing O&M. At least potentially, but they're, again, may have a much higher upfront cost initially in order to do that long-term. So, I mean, to the mayor's point, how long would it take us to potentially make up that initial upfront investment in O&M savings? But those are, if you're talking gravity feed, which I think is obviously the preferred in any situation, those are the only two options that would provide that type for us.
Some of the expensive, looking at these roads, to really buckle down to a cost to go to a road, we literally have to go blue stake the roads, find the utilities, get elevations, because to get to the dollar amount, for somebody to, otherwise we put a 40% contingency or 50% contingency, unless we, and that's gonna start taking some real hours and getting a lot of people out there, and so I'm
Sure,
concerned.
it can't go up and down, it has to have.
In my previous life, that's what I did, was utility work for UDOT projects.
And
So,
and so that could
it's
be
the
a
highest
lot of
risk
hours.
item on any project, and they would often throw like
Big
70
contingencies.
or 110% contingency on some of that.
Yeah.
And that was just high pressure gas or high tension power lines. So there is a lot of risk. We can look into it and kind of get a number, but it's gonna be a little fuzzy on the upfront cost for that. The O&M costs, I think we can get around to some of those. It's just, we can look at pumping and
And for me, the 1.2 to 1.6 million is that I can live with, because that gives me a ballpark range what we're looking at. What I don't know is it $10,000 a year or is it $150,000 a year? And that is a huge difference there that would really sway my decision on what I would want to see.
we'll dial in, we'll get some good numbers.
Like from an engineering standpoint or maybe a public safety, is there a recommendation that you guys have as to which option or you'd like to see done?
It's a great question, and I think what we've looked at is, as it laid out in history with the master plan. Other engineers that have worked on this before me and me looking at it, that was always the preferred alternative, was the gravity system out. As the development's coming
it's
along.
just that it could never be accomplished because we don't control it all.
And there were discussions with the people in the seats at the other cities at the time when that was going on, that, okay, that's gonna happen. Things change over time.
Yeah.
Development pressures come along and change things. So that's that's where we've got caught.
Yeah, I don't,
The engineering would always look at the maintenance and the functionality. We'd be looking at an open channel or pipe gravity. Pumps cost a lot more and have a lot more issues as we talked about, so gravity system's always what we'll look at as an engineering recommendation.
yeah, and obviously it's easier just to go straight on out there, but then it's just like you said, sometimes there's other circumstances that are playing. You have to figure out if the other alternative will be outside of the realm of what's fiscally responsible.
Yeah, we'll get the L&M numbers back.
So the costs you have there, say for 1B, 1C, does that include land? That
No.
additional right of way that's
Nope. So
required?
it's just infrastructure, and that, on that third column, I just identified what that is, what that acreage is.
So that's it.
That essentially is the issue.
We've gotten numbers for land. When we purchased Sentinel Ridge Boulevard right away, we were around $230,000 per acre. We've got a number from the developer that's around $700,000 an acre. So,
An option.
Way to narrow that down for us, Blake.
just to let you know, that's what we're looking at.
That's an option.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
so our Sentinel Ridge was an unentitled property, zoned A1 at the time. The new property that we're looking at, the Riverton, is entitled.
Is entitled.
So it's probably on the other end of the spectrum.
Right.
So option 3, what kind of property acquisition, if any, is needed there?
That would require permits and plans and approval through Riverton.
And maybe right away down 40th.
Potentially easement.
So-
Not necessarily purchase land,
It could just be an agreement at the least, right? It depends on, I guess, what they would require.
The risk is, like we talked about, if we start having to relocate utilities and they've got to jump into someone's property, now we're going across people's front yards. So we would need to dial in more. We don't know where all the utilities are, what their depths are. There's requirements for spacing. We can't be within so many feet of a gas line, a power line, another water line, just so they can get in and maintain it.
So I don't see like the option maybe 1B, because it's always been designed to have it to be an open channel, correct? So are you what, A and B, are you talking about open channel to Riverton and then piping Riverton, or are you talking about piping the whole thing?
So these alternatives are simply just the yellow portion, right?
Okay,
Yeah, it's just yellow.
alright, perfect.
We have control of what goes on.
Right.
You have control.
We could go from a pipe to open channel, if we did open channel here, we could do pipe there, or we could do pipe the whole way or whatever.
Right. But the cost is just the yellow portion.
Yes.
Okay.
So have we given you as little direction as possible? Do you have what you need, or do you need more?
Okay, so good tests, go forward.
I've got task, we're looking at O&M costs, taking a look at that, dialing in that just a little bit more.
Can you send a copy of this presentation to us? And that costs analysis.
I'll bring back the funding that.
Impact fee analysis.
Any further questions by the council?
Send it to them right now.
Okay, with that, I'll accept a motion to temporarily adjourn, and go into our regular meeting.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.